Thank you for giving this half an hour. The question in the title is meant literally. Can a headset costing a few €100 be pointed at one of the most contested experiences there is? People who report hearing voices they believe are transmitted to them, and produce a number that means something? The answer is yes, with important limits. What follows is not a finding. It is a design, a costed plan, and an appeal. Let me be blunt about where this stands, because the honesty is load-bearing for everything after it. Nothing here has been built. No hardware bought. No participant recruited. No ethics review commissioned. Every chart you are about to see is a schematic of a predicted pattern. None show measured data. What exists is a design, a platform that already carries much of the software, and a first stage costed at €2,000. Here is the ask up front. For things. €2,000 to prove the instrument works and that a person can complete the protocol at home unsupervised. 25 participants who hear transmitted voices often enough that episodes occur inside a recording block, and who are willing to pay a refundable deposit, a contribution and shipping. 25 who do not hear voices, and volunteers across 8 skill areas. 5 parts. Who is asking and why a third of the engineering already exists. The instrument. The 4 tests which are the scientific heart of it. The discipline, the platform, and the hardware. And what this needs in order to exist. Part 1. Who is asking? One Voice is a secure, non-profit platform established under Belgian law for people who report systematic technological targeting. It carries a collective record, a formal declaration, signed across the world, every signature timestamped and chained, provides documentation tools, and it is a community, a directory and world map, messaging across 40 languages, a wall, events, memorials. This matters more than it sounds. The other serious proposal in this space implies building a platform from scratch. That work is largely done, hardware-bound credentials, integrity proofs, cryptographic timestamping, and local AI inference on hardware nobody else controls, which is the only acceptable arrangement for health data about this population. What is missing is 4 things: a session runner, a signal pipeline, a report generator, and a cross-subject module. The declaration is the center of the platform, and the logic behind it is the same logic behind this experiment. It records what a signatory experiences, petitions authorities to investigate rather than dismiss, and creates a permanent time-stamped record. Only anonymized data at the basic level, and withdrawal at any moment. When one person tells a story, it is dismissed as anecdotal. The point of a declaration is arithmetic. So if you are a targeted individual, there are 2 things you can do today, and neither costs anything. Create an account at one.witisk.org and sign the declaration. It adds your voice to the collective record and unlocks the messaging, the wall, the directory, and the documentation tools. Signing is separate from taking part in this study, but the study recruits through the platform. An account is where it starts. Part 2. The instrument. People who report hearing voices they believe are transmitted to them, often called V2K, short for voice to skull, are usually offered one of 2 responses. Either they are told it is a symptom, and the conversation ends, or they are told it is definitely a transmission, and the conversation also ends. The 2 answers point in opposite directions and share exactly one defect. Neither measures anything. If a design can only produce one answer, it is not an experiment. It is a ceremony. EEG is a long word for a simple thing. Metal discs on the scalp recording voltage changes. An AA battery is 1.5 volts. A brain response is a millionth of that. It sees the surface well and the depths badly. It has superb timing and poor geography. And a single response is buried in noise, so you repeat the same thing 100 times an average. Which is why every block here is boring. Boring is a design requirement. 8 sensors, and where they go is not a matter of taste. The names come from an international standard that exists so any lab can reproduce any other's placement exactly. CZ at the crown is where the main measurement is largest. That measurement is the N100. When any abrupt sound reaches your ears, the trace at the top of your head dips 1/10 of a second later. It is not a meaning response. It is the hearing system noting that something arrived. Part 3 and the scientific heart of it. 4 tests in a single session. Test 1 is the centerpiece. Start with a fact everyone knows. You cannot tickle yourself. The touch is real, the nerve endings fire, but the response is damped because the system was warned. Your brain does not passively receive the world. It predicts it. Every motor command sends a copy to the sensory regions about to be affected, saying, "Whatever you are about to feel, I caused it." The same mechanism operates in hearing. You can measure it directly. Record a person saying a syllable out loud, then play that exact recording back. Physically, the sound at the eardrum is nearly identical. But the N100 is markedly smaller when they are speaking. Listening, the blue trace dips to -8 microvolts. Speaking, the red trace only to -4.5. That gap is the discount their brain applies to its own output. On the right, a miscalibrated system, almost no discount at all. So why does this bear on voices? For 25 years, one of the strongest findings in hallucination research has been that, in people who hear voices, this discount is reduced. Their brain fails to apply the full "this was me" tag to self-generated speech, and untagged inner speech arrives feeling as though it came from somewhere else. So this is not a measurement of transmissions. It is a measurement of whether the authorship tagging system is working. 3 groups. People with no voices, people who hear voices with an established clinical explanation, and the study group. 2 competing predictions. In blue, the study group looks like the clinical group. In gold, like the comparison group. And I do not know which one you would get. Nobody does, because as far as I can establish, nobody has ever applied this measurement to this population under proper conditions. Each of the 3 outcomes is publishable. A reduced discount supports the internal generation account. Not proof, but it makes the standard explanation harder to dismiss. A normal discount would be the genuinely surprising result, demanding an explanation nobody currently has. But look at the 3rd row. The study group might split into subgroups. Self-reported populations at scale are rarely uniform, and separating one cleanly on an objective measure would be a substantial contribution. Running it is almost disappointingly simple. In the talk block, the volunteer says a short "ah" about 100 times, and a microphone records every one. In the listen block, that recording plays back at the same level. Same sounds, same person, same ears, the only difference is who caused them. Average both, find the N100, subtract. Now the warning, and it has nothing to do with the brain. Timing. You are measuring a dip that lasts 50 milliseconds. If your computer does not know exactly when each sound started, the averaging smears the response into nothing, and you conclude wrongly that there was no effect. The software timestamp records intent. The analog input records what actually happened. So split the audio physically, and verify the chain with an oscilloscope before testing a single volunteer. Test 2 asks a blunter question. At the moments a person says they are hearing a voice, is their auditory cortex in a different state? An occupied system responds less strongly to a new demand. So the volunteer holds a button down whenever a voice is present, while the computer plays a plain tone at random intervals. And the caveat stated plainly. A positive result here does not identify a cause. Attention alone can reduce the N100. If someone is concentrating hard on an internal experience, their response to an external beep will drop. Exactly what you would expect from an internally generated experience too. Test 2 establishes that the reports correspond to a real change in brain state. It does not say where the change comes from. Test 3 came out of a good question. If people report replying to the voices in their heads, would that show up as something distinguishable from ordinary inner monologue? Yes, probably, not because we can read the words, we cannot, but because a deliberate act of silent speech directed at something has structure that idle thinking does not. Condition A is pure inner monologue. C is the condition under test. And B is what makes this more than hand-waving. A genuine silent reply to a voice that definitely exists outside the head. You have manufactured your own ground truth. 2 more channels come free with the same amplifier. Subvocalization. When most people speak silently, the speech muscles do not stay completely still. Far too faint to hear, but within reach of an electrode. That gives a precise timestamp for a silent reply. Not everyone subvocalizes, though. Second, the readiness potential. Voluntary acts are preceded by a slow negative drift starting a second or 2 before. On the right, a thought that simply drifts in no organized buildup. The 4th channel is the cheapest test in the design. Conversation has a shape. Speakers alternate, and gaps between turns cluster in a narrow band. So genuine back and forth means replies fall in the gaps, not scattered at random. You test it by shuffling the reply times thousands of times and asking how often the shuffled version looks as structured as the real one. The reason to run all 4 channels is that a classifier can use them jointly. Train it on condition A versus B, then apply it to condition C. That is much stronger than comparing averages, because the classifier is fixed before C is ever examined. If C reads as B-like, the person is performing a genuine addressed act of silent speech. If A-like, it resembles self-directed thinking. And if neither, with low confidence, that is the honest and quite likely outcome with 8 channels. Here is the limit, which I want to state out loud rather than bury. None of this identifies the interlocutor. A person conversing with an internally generated voice is genuinely conversing. Test 3 establishes whether a dialogue is occurring. It says nothing whatsoever about what is on the other end. Anyone who presents it alone as evidence of an external source is overreaching, and I would rather say that here than have it said for me later. One further test is worth attempting, though it is the most fragile. The brain responds distinctively to content it did not expect. Consider the implication. If a voice is generated inside the same brain that hears it, that brain has no reason to be surprised, it wrote the script. But there is no precise timestamp for when the words arrived. It is nearly free once the session is running, so include it, but declare it exploratory in advance. Part 4. The discipline, the platform, and the instrument. The equipment list is genuinely modest, and this is what surprises people. The reason this study has not been done is not that the instruments are expensive. An 8-channel amplifier, 800 to 1200 euros. Wet electrodes, and they must be wet because dry electrode noise will destroy the N100. But building the amplifier from the same converter chip the commercial units use brings the whole kit to under 300 euros. That is literally the same front-end silicon. Everything fits into a single visit of a little over 3 hours, of which about 100 minutes is actual recording. Setup and gel. A baseline rest. Talk and listen. The beat probes. Cued silent speech. The free talking back condition. And then block 6 repeats talk and listen. That repeat is not padding. If your headline measurement does not reproduce within the same person 90 minutes later, it is noise, and you have found that out before publishing rather than after. 3 groups take part. People who report hearing transmitted voices, screened for frequency. People who do not, matched on age, sex, and handedness, establishing what a normal score looks like in this equipment, in this room. And people who hear voices with an established clinical explanation, which is what makes the study decisive rather than merely suggestive. The blue curve crosses the 80% line at roughly 26 people per group. The analysis itself is standard and unglamorous. What matters is not the steps but when the decisions about them are made. Before recording a single volunteer, you publish which electrode, which window, which test, and what the primary outcome is, and you timestamp it publicly. If you have 20 possible measurements and you pick the one that came out significant, you will find something significant every time, and it will mean nothing. Pre-registration converts a search into a test. Before publishing, you work through a list designed to break your own study before somebody else does. Muscle contamination, because study group volunteers may simply be more tense. Speaking loudness, because loudness changes the N100. Trial counts, because a group that loses more trials has noisier averages. Medication, hearing thresholds, expectation, sleep, and caffeine. None of this is sophisticated. All of it is the difference between a result and an artifact. Everything so far can be done with averaging and a t-test, and that is deliberate. But cross-condition decoding genuinely needs a model. EEG is not fed raw into a classifier in a study this size. It is turned into features, and the choice of features matters more than the choice of algorithm. Time window amplitudes, band power, channel covariance mapped to a Riemannian tangent space, the muscle envelope, and behavioral timing. If you take one thing from this section, take this: never let trials from the same person appear in both the training set and the test set. Individual EEG is highly idiosyncratic. A model given some of a person's trials can identify their remaining trials with high accuracy, purely from their signature, while learning nothing about the effect. The correct scheme is subject-wise splits. And resist the neural network. With 75 volunteers, the number of subjects limits generalization. Since the phrase AI analysis invites it, the boundary is worth stating explicitly. Language models are genuinely good at reviewing analysis code for exactly the leakage errors I just described, and at drafting the pre-registration. And there are uses to refuse. Interpreting the EEG signal itself, these are not signal analysis models, and treating their output as a measurement is a category error. Producing an explanation after the fact. A study like this generates 300 gigabytes of recordings and a chain of decisions that has to be reconstructible years later by someone who was not there. The architecture is deliberately conventional, nothing in it is novel, and that is a feature. 7 layers, plus 4 cross-cutting services, each existing to make a specific failure impossible rather than merely unlikely. A blinding service the pipeline cannot reach. Provenance and integrity, because the accusation that the plan changed after the fact will be made, and the answer should be a verifiable timestamp rather than a promise. So how would a participant experience this? 9 steps. Consent with all outcomes stated in advance. Kit dispatch. Guided setup with live impedance per channel. An automatic timing self-test, where the session refuses to start if jitter is out of specification. Then the guided session about 2 hours. Step 6 runs at the same time. The server watches the stream and warns within seconds if an electrode lifts, not 3 weeks later. Here is how the new components sit against what already exists. On the participant side, a streaming headset that puts brain, muscle, sound, and buttons into one frame, signed at source, with a session runner that instructs but is no longer in the data path. Every box on the right runs on hardware we control. In a lab, a trained person sits with the participant and says, "Now do this, now press the button." Remotely, the software has to be that person because there is nobody in the room to catch a mistake. Fitting 8 wet electrodes without help is the hardest thing being asked. So continue stays disabled while any channel is out of tolerance. It is tempting to make that dismissible. That would be a mistake. The consequence is invisible until the data is found unusable weeks later. During recording, several interface rules follow directly from the science. 1 instruction per screen, because task misunderstanding in a remote session is invisible and unrecoverable. No live EEG trace, ever. A scrolling waveform invites participants to watch their own brain activity and react to it, contaminating the measurement being taken. Button timelines are labeled as records of what was reported, never as findings, because a colored timeline is exactly the graphic that gets screenshotted and captioned as proof. And now the hardest design decision in the module, which I expect to be unpopular. The session report contains everything about the recording. Impedance, interference, timing jitter, trials surviving rejection. Contains nothing about the person. Nothing readable as a diagnosis. Individual variation here is wide enough that one person's score is genuinely uninterpretable. And handing a confident-looking verdict to someone who has waited years for exactly that document would be harmful if it said yes and harmful if it said no. Part 14 works through every screen because in a remote study the interface is not a presentation layer over the protocol. It is the protocol. The landing screen answers 3 questions before anyone commits 2 hours. Is my equipment ready? What is going to happen to me? And what happened to my previous sessions, with rejected sessions staying visible because a platform that quietly deletes failed attempts is one whose record cannot be audited. 3 more. The talking back block is where distress is most likely, so there is an explicit invitation to stop and a statement that an unfinished session still counts. The upload screen shows the hash computed on the participant's own device before transmission. The visible form of a claim the platform makes elsewhere in prose, that custody begins with the participant, not the server. The scientific value is in the cohort, not the session. But combining data across people, on health data from a vulnerable and internationally distributed population, needs more than good intentions. 5 tiers. Identity in an encrypted vault that never touches the analysis stack. Raw recordings. Derived features, no audio, no content. Cohort aggregates, suppressed below a minimum cell size. And published findings. Now the premise that decides how the hardware has to be built. The intuitive argument is that if everything arrives at the same place, it is thereby synchronized. It is not. Between a headset in a living room and a server in Brussels sit Wi-Fi, a router, an ISP and operating system scheduling. up to 200 milliseconds of delay that varies packet to packet. For a measurement living in a 50 millisecond window, that is fatal. So one converter, one sample clock, one frame. Here is the instrument. The Texas Instruments ADS 1299 is effectively the only sensible choice. 8 channels, 24-bit, simultaneous sampling, and built-in lead-off detection, which gives you the live impedance display for free. And the synchronization is the one genuinely useful idea. On the sync channel, you do not need speech fidelity. You need onset timing. So the stimulus and the microphone become slow envelopes, fed into the same converter that is digitizing the brain. 3 details on the transport. One sample carries brain, muscle, sound, and button data sharing a single index. 16 channels at 1000 Hz is 64 kilobytes a second, so bandwidth is a non-issue. The sample counter is the only timeline in the system, which makes network jitter a transport problem rather than a data problem. 3 checks are not optional on self-built hardware, and all 3 are free. One qualified electronics person reviews the design before the first unit goes on ahead. Every unit is validated against a known signal. 25 hand-built boards are 25 slightly different instruments. And borrow a commercial amplifier once and confirm the N100 matches. Without that, a null result cannot be distinguished from a noise floor that swallowed the effect. Part 5 and the reason for the presentation. Everything so far describes a single-site study. 1 room, 75 people. That is not the half that answers whether a finding generalizes. The second half did not originate with me. Mikhailo Sokolov, a fellow signatory on TI One Voice, sent me a white paper from the Neurolaws Foundation proposing something different. Rather than bringing people to an instrument, mail the instrument to the people. The 2 designs are not competitors, but the order matters enormously. Establish the signature first, then take that measurement out to scale. The reverse produces volume the first can no longer interpret. Here is where this departs most sharply from the original proposal. A device per participant caps the number of participants at the number you can afford to give away. A shared pool changes the arithmetic entirely. The constraint becomes turnaround time rather than capital. Allocated with the deposit held, shipped tracked, session guided and quality checked live, returned, refurbished, deposit returned in full. So what does a participant actually pay? A refundable deposit of €150, returned in full when a working unit comes back. It is not a charge, it is set close to the replacement cost of a self-built unit, so it protects the fleet without being punitive. A contribution of €50 or €75, not refunded, and shipping at cost both ways. A completed session costs the program just over €73 once everything is counted, including publication fees and independent statistical review. And the dividing line falls in a convenient place. Everything except those research overheads comes to almost exactly €50. Model 1. Participants contribute 50, and donors cover the rest. Model 2. Participants contribute 75, and nothing needs raising. The preference is Model 1, for methodological rather than sentimental reasons. One thing here is not optional, and it is not charity. €200 of temporary outlay plus international postage is a serious sum, and a great many people in this population are unemployed, unwell, or estranged from the family that would otherwise lend it. If ability to pay decides who takes part, income becomes a hidden variable running through every result. That is a scientific defect before it is an ethical one. So part of any funding raised is ring-fenced and granted privately. 3 stages, each gated on the one before. Stage 0, €2,000. 2 self-built kits, the timing chain proven, a session runner prototype, 6 to 8 pilot sessions. It answers whether the instrument works and whether a person can complete this protocol unsupervised. Stage 1, 10,500. 10 kits, ethics review, 75 participants. This is the stage that decides. Here are the actual numbers. Stage 0, €900 of parts, 250 for bench gear, 200 for consumables, 400 for pilot shipping, 250 contingency, 2,000 total. Stage 0 needs funding because there is nothing to contribute to yet. Stage 1 needs 10,500. So here is the ask of participants who experience the voices, stated without softening. About 2 hours of recording plus 40 minutes of setup at home. A refundable €150 deposit and a €50 contribution, plus shipping at cost, waived entirely for anyone who cannot meet it. And here is what you must accept: that the instrument may produce a result you do not want, and if it does, that will be published. And that no individual result will be returned to you, because the measurement does not support one. And this is the honest pitch, which I am not going to dress up. Nobody involved in this can promise you vindication. What can be promised is that the question gets asked with instruments rather than opinions. That the method is published in advance so it cannot be bent afterwards. And that whatever comes out gets published, including the outcome that is unwelcome. If that is worth 2 hours of your time, we would like to hear from you. This is the recruitment need that gets forgotten, and it is the one most likely to determine whether any of this produces interpretable results. Roughly 25 people who do not hear voices on identical hardware. Without them, there is no reference for what a normal measurement looks like, and every number the study produces floats free. It is also harder to recruit because there is no personal stake, which is precisely what makes the data valuable. 8 kinds of help, roughly in order of how much each would unblock. Embedded and firmware, experience with the ADS 1299 would shortcut months. Signal processing and statistics. Someone who has done real event-related potential work is worth more here than a general data scientist. Logistics and operations, genuinely the hardest sustained work in the program, and the least glamorous. Ethics and legal, and translation. One partnership would strengthen this more than any other single thing. A university group or clinical department willing to host the ethical review, help recruit the clinical comparison group, and put their name on the methods. Not to take it over, to make it citable. And there is something in it for them, because the methodological question here is genuinely interesting and largely unstudied. How do you investigate a contested experience in a distrustful population without a design that can only confirm? I have said versions of this throughout, but it belongs in one place without softening. This design cannot detect a transmission. An EEG amplifier is not a receiver. It cannot decode content. 8 electrodes cannot recover words. Cannot locate the source in the brain. Cannot tell any individual anything about themselves. And no amount of modeling repairs any of that. What it can do is narrow the space, replace one piece of assertion with a number. This study recruits people who are frightened, often isolated, frequently disbelieved, and in many cases hoping that a machine will finally confirm what they have been telling people for years. That carries obligations, and they are not satisfied by a consent form. Say the possible outcomes out loud before consent, including the one where the results support an internal explanation. Plan the debrief for the difficult outcome. Get real ethical review, and publish the null result. One request of anyone who watches this and agrees with it: do not describe this as a study that will prove anything. It is a study designed so that either answer would be believable, which is a different and much rarer thing. Overselling it now is the fastest available way to ensure that its results, whatever they turn out to be, are dismissed unread. The design in this presentation is not exotic. Every component is a standard technique with an established literature, and built rather than bought, the instrument costs less than a mid-range phone. What is missing is not capability. What is missing is the willingness to treat the question as a question. The measurement exists. It has never been pointed here under conditions rigorous enough that either answer would be believed. None of which has happened yet. Today, this is a document. It becomes an experiment when someone finds €2,000 of parts, an academic willing to put a study through their ethics committee, 25 people willing to be measured, 25 willing to sit as controls, and a handful prepared to solder boards and ship boxes. €2,000. That is what currently stands between a design and a measurement. If you can fund it, if you can build it, if you would take part, whether or not you hear voices, get in touch. And if you disagree with the design, well-argued objections are equally welcome. Everything runs through TI One Voice at one.witisk.org, where you can sign up and sign the declaration. Thank you for your time.